Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
To another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado. Angie, we're on the heels of a 42-9 victory over Colorado for the Oregon State football team, pushing the Beavers to 6 wins on October 22nd, making the Beavers bowl eligible for the first time in the month of October for just the 4th time in program history. So the Beavers are doing borderline unprecedented things right now in this 2022 season. So I got to ask, are you polishing your bowling ball? Do you have your bowling shoes out? Are you
ready
to hit the lanes?
Let's do it.
We're just we have our fingers crossed that we are not heading to El Paso at the end of December, but we'll take whatever the bowl season committee and all of these different bowls give us. But it's exciting to see Oregon State with so many wins to their name at this point in the season. I mean, Angie, this takes you back to 2012, 2013, right?
It does. I mean, this team and what's not surprising though, Carter, you and I saw this spring camp of this past year with the defense and even Eric. I remember telling him, like, this defense is like 1,000% improved. And I don't think he believed me. And then that first game he was watching, he's like, oh, wow, they look good. You and I talked about that. We saw it in the very first scrimmage this fall that the defense completely stymied Oregon State's offense. We also were very high on Damian Martinez, said he was going to have a breakout year. He is showing that. So all the way around, I don't know if that, I mean, I had the team pegged for 10-2, so I can't say that I'm surprised by this, but
it's still on the table.
It is still on the table.
Believe it or not.
It is. I mean, don't know if it'll happen, but it is still on the table.
Here we are entering Oregon State's bye week at the end of October, talking about 10-2 still being a possibility. I mean, Oregon State's not even mathematically out of the Pac-12 title race. They would need a little bit of help to get there, but I think that just goes to show how impressive of a season Oregon State is putting together. The Beavers now winners of their last 3 games after dropping those 2 to the ranked opponents. They enter the bye week at 6-2 and 3 spots outside of the AP Top 25, which was released earlier on Sunday. Of course, that's a weekly thing. Oregon State had showed up at as high as 21 on one of the ballots, received 25 votes there. And like I said, they're technically ranked 28th right now in the country, which doesn't mean much, but the optics of being in the top 25, you can't discount that. And so for Oregon State to have this opportunity now with an off week to maybe jump into the top 25 and not even play a game, that's, it would be nice to see a little 24 or 25 next to that Oregon State on the scoreboard when they head up to Seattle in about a week and a half.
Yeah, I don't think that'll happen. I mean, I would be shocked if that happened. I think so many of the national voters haven't seen Oregon State.
Yeah.
And it takes me back to 2 games of the schedule of the Pac-12 season that really stand out to me from an Oregon State perspective. The first is the Washington State totally just couging it against the Ducks. I mean, they had that game that was like, and then the Ducks just scored 21 points in like the span of 2 minutes. And then Oregon State, USC. Those 2 right there. I mean, especially if Oregon State had beat USC, Oregon State is in the top 25 right now. Probably, 17,
borderline
18.
top 15.
Yeah, borderline top 15. So, I mean, you can't sit back and say woulda, coulda, shoulda, but those 2 games to me, when I look at the entire Pac-12 season so far, those 2 games really stand out from a standpoint of how that would have helped Oregon State so many levels.
If there's a team and a program that could still be quote unquote flying under the radar at 6-2, it's Oregon State. And, if you keep piling up those wins, I know that the quote unquote quality wins aren't necessarily there. You haven't beaten a ranked team yet. Some of the tougher opponents on the early part of your schedule haven't played up to expectations. But a 6-2 team should probably be ranked. If you're
In
in
a
the Power
Power Five
Five,
conference, yeah.
if you play in the Pac-12, if Oregon State's an SEC team, they're in the top 20. I'll just say that. But
Yeah.
I think flying under the radar at 6-2 is very Oregon State. It feels right, and it feels like Oregon State will surprise some people if it ends up at 8, 9, 10 wins. But we're looking very big picture there. That's more of a bye week conversation. We still have a game to recap. But before we do that, Angie and I are going to talk a little bit more about bowl eligibility. Then we'll really dive into Oregon State's 42-9 blowout win over Colorado, a team that's that's reeling as an interim staff, but still impressive nonetheless to beat a Pac-12 team by 33 points. Talk about what went well, what didn't. Recap some of the injury notes. Deshaun Fenwick at running back notably did not play. We'll update you on that situation. And then, of course, we'll revisit our keys to the game at the very end. But Angie, speaking of bowl eligibility, because that is still, I feel like it's kind of one of the dominant storylines right now with any team that reaches 6 wins. I know that bowl games mean less in the college football playoff era. I know that Oregon State got off of the bowl game schneid last year, but it still feels like somewhat of a landmark for this program. Maybe not necessarily to get there, but the fashion in which they got there, I think is what stands out.
Yeah, I mean, here we are early. There's still 4 games left on the schedule, and this is a team that it has been so down. I mean, I look at Colorado and I feel bad for them because I think as Beavers, as covering this team, as Beaver fans, we know exactly what it feels like because Oregon State is only probably 5-6 years removed from where they were. So, you know how tough that climb has been. And so that makes being bowl eligible for the second time in 2 years, I think that much sweeter.
Yeah. And I go back to my point. Oregon State has only been bowl eligible in the month of October 4 times. Well,
in history.
Like ever. You only have to go back to 2013 for the last time they did it, actually. So, we're, a decade removed from it, which I guess in hindsight is a little further back than I thought. 2013 still feels like it was just yesterday. But I looked and I tweeted this out a couple of hours before we hit record here. I looked at that schedule and I felt like that team trended downwards at the end of the season. And I was right. I looked back and Oregon State lost its final 5 games of the regular season after getting bowl eligible on October 17th. So they beat California 3 weeks into October and then didn't win again until they played in Honolulu and beat Boise State. And then I dove even further into it and I said, wait, these teams that they played at the end of the year, this looks like a very similar schedule. They played University of Washington. They played Arizona State. They played Oregon in 3 of their final 5 games. Those are 3 of the final 4 games for this year's team. Like there are some eerie similarities there, but there's just something about this 2022 team that makes me feel like they're not going to let up just because they got over that 6-win hump.
No, and 2013, that was really kind of the downslide of Coach Riley's tenure at Oregon State. It was the start of kind of this. I don't want to say he lost the team, but it definitely was a year that kind of things started slipping away as far as just the locker room, the culture, everything kind of started to change a little bit. It wasn't quite as cohesive. I think what I'm most impressed about, and we'll dive into the Colorado game here in a little bit, but I told you off air, what impresses me most about this is Oregon State over the years has had a tendency to play down to opponents, to maybe sleepwalk through games like this that they are expected to win by double digits. And they didn't do that at all. And I think that speaks volumes, not only to the coaching staff, but even more so to the veteran leadership, the Jaden Grants, the Brandon Kippers of the locker room.
And they kept their foot on the gas too. I mean, they scored a touchdown in the 4th quarter. Jaden Grant picked off a pass on Colorado's final offensive possession. We'll dive again further into that in just a minute. But Angie, one of the things that was on my mind throughout this game and into the post-game press conference, and as I was writing my game recap, I don't know if you watched the post-game video, but my questions were very direct and pointed in one direction, and that was the fact that nobody within this locker room or nobody on the coaching staff even mentioned going to a bowl game as being a goal this year. There was no talk about it throughout the week as a 5-win team goes into this game against Colorado about being bowl eligible if you win. I guess the locker room after the game, there was not even a peep about going bowling. And it just feels so different to last year, where after win number 6, you've got fans storming the field. You've got Nathan Eldridge bowling his helmet in the locker room. I mean, that was the story of the season. Jonathan Smith came into the media room like 2 hours after we were done and came in and said hi and was in a great mood. And it just felt like business as usual yesterday. We didn't have any of those those fireworks or anything out of the ordinary.
But
after
Carter,
win number 6.
all year, their goal hasn't been a bowl game. It's been Pac-12 title.
Right.
So,
So what I'm getting at is the expectation was that Oregon State would always win 6 games and that they would do it early on in the year and prime themselves for a big November. So to that end, it's somewhat of mission accomplished, right?
Exactly. And I think those of us that are around the team a ton, we've been around this team. There was I never had a doubt that this team would make a bowl game. I didn't know if Pac-12 title would be in the realm, but last year, just making the bowl game was huge. This year, way bigger expectations. And Jaden Grant alluded to it in his, talking about just how spoiled, the young pups are, because, when he showed up, and I know we'll talk about this a little later, but he talks about now it's just kind of like this guarantee, oh yeah, we're going bowling for these young kids. He spent a lot of years where bowling wasn't even in the conversation.
Yeah, guys like Damian Martinez and Jack Velling, who obviously we're going to highlight throughout this episode for just another monster game for both of them, came into this season, on the heels of Oregon State going to a bowl game. They probably come in expecting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 wins. And that's something that when Jaden Grant came in 2016 would have been, just unthinkable. You think of how many wins these true freshmen have under their belts already this year compared to how long it took Jaden Grant to pile up that many. Yeah. Grant was probably here for 3 years before he won 6 games. I didn't do the math, but crunching the numbers in my head, that sounds about right. So just, you have to feel good for him that he is seeing the fruits of his labor right now.
Yeah. A lot of those guys. I even think the guys that haven't been there quite as long, the Tristan Gebbia, Tyjon Lindsey, some of those guys that have been with the program for more than, for 4 years or so, have been through a lot. Tristan Gebbia watching, it was fun to see him be able to get out and take a few snaps. He doesn't look 100%. He looked like he was a little limpy out there, but to see him get a couple snaps was good to see. But yeah, Jaden Grant has seen a lot.
That might be saying the very least. But yeah, no credit to all of those veterans for elevating the program to a point where here we are sitting at 6-2 and we're not even really focused on the bowl game. This 13 minutes we've spent talking about it is the most Angie and I have talked about a bowl game all year. And it's obligatory because they are at 6-2. And here we are, we're going to move on and spend the majority of this episode talking about the game and not even focusing on what is going to unfold over the next handful of weeks. But I will say, if you stick with BeaverBlitz throughout the week, we are going to dive into some of the projections and some of the scenarios that could play out. Some of our bye-week content will dive into what might occur in the postseason for Oregon State. But let's talk about this game that just unfolded. The kickoff was almost exactly 24 hours ago from the point that we're talking right now. Oregon State wins 42-9 against Colorado, covers a 23.5 point spread, which, going into the game, we said it feels like the right number. It could be higher, it could be lower. Like it feels like Vegas was spot on there. And sure enough, Oregon State took care of business and covered that thing and won by 33. Angie, I'll let you dive into the yardage here. So Oregon State, pretty much close to doubled up Colorado, and it took a while for the Buffs to even get to the 290 that they posted. But did you feel like the yardage numbers 472 to 290 was pretty telling of just how dominant Oregon State was on both sides of the ball?
Oh, 1,000%. And I know Thursday we talked about kind of keys, and I wanted to see Oregon State over the 200-yard mark for rushing. 270. I think that was huge. I'm stealing off Carter's notes because he types up this nice little rundown for us.
We got 4 pages today. That
I know
might be a new record.
There's a lot, but so each of the last 3 opponents that Oregon State has faced has been held to under 100 yards rushing. Yeah. That is huge, and I know we're going to dive into more of the defensive performance, but that was a masterpiece. We do the defensive points. They graded out to an A-, which we're tough graders. It's a full-on. I mean, we have a whole spreadsheet that takes into account the numbers. For them to anything of her like a B is a really, really solid game. A-. I haven't seen that in years and years, probably decade. But I think, Beavers were average, or in those same 3 games that they were held opponents to under 100 yards, they were averaging 221, almost 222 yards a game. Huge. But that 270 number was huge. And Damian Martinez was spot on. I thought Jam Griffin had a good game. It was fun to see Isaiah Newell get some carries, Kanoa Shannon. They pretty much cleared the bench by the end.
Yeah, Oregon State has held its last 3 opponents to a combined 197 yards on the ground, and the Beavers on Saturday alone eclipsed that mark by 73 offensively. So that I think it's a testament not only to Damian Martinez, but also just to the play of both line groups at Oregon State. It feels like the Beavers are winning at the point of attack on both sides.
And that should be noted, Carter, because, we've been so critical of the defensive line play over the past 4 or 5 years. It's really improved.
And I don't know what's more impressive, what the defense has done the last couple of weeks, because like you just said, you might not have seen an A- grade on the defensive points in, close to a decade. Well, we've come out of each of the last 2 games and now the 3rd game saying, was that the best defensive performance we've seen since 2012? That's 3 weeks in a row we're having the same conversation. It just gets better and better. Obviously, the competition has, maybe decreased a bit at this point in the season, but Oregon State's defense is playing with so much confidence, executing at a level that we haven't seen in years. But we do have to highlight Damian Martinez, because for as well as the run defense played, the run offense was even better. Damian Martinez, the true freshman running back from Lewisville, Texas, 22 carries, 178 yards rushing. That's 8.1 per carry. Just incredible. And 3 touchdowns for what I think was probably the best single game rushing performance we've seen since maybe Jermar Jefferson's true freshman year.
Yeah. Oh, easily. Yeah.
Jam Griffin, Isaiah Newell, Kanoa Shannon also got into the rotation there as the game progressed, and they actually all averaged at least 6 yards per carry as well. So I think we were always going to see Oregon State's rushing offense kind of excel in this game. It felt like, as you're going up against the worst run defense in the country, that the opportunities were going to be there. And we saw that because the floor was set at 6 yards per carry. But for Damian Martinez to capitalize and to post darn near 200 yards and 3 touchdowns, that's the kind of execution you want to see.
Absolutely. And, I go back to Thursday when we spoke with Adam Munson-Tiger from Buff Stampede, and, talking about his keys to the game. I'm going to jump into the passing game for a minute, because he really talked up JT Shroud. And honestly, Shroud, he is a good quarterback. He has a good arm. He made some good passes. He had some huge drops. But again, we're talking about passing game, but I do have to give props to that defensive backfield, because they looked spectacular.
Right. JT Shroud, that's a guy who committed to an SEC team out of high school, transferred into Colorado to get a little more playing time. He's a good quarterback. He actually did outgain Ben Gulbranson in this game by 4 yards, 206 passing yards to Gulbranson's 202. But it was much more inefficient. I actually would argue that Ben Gulbranson had maybe his best game as a Beaver, and certainly the most efficient.
Yeah, 64% for Gulbranson, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. I thought, for the game plan being run the ball, I thought the passes were that he did make were good. I thought Tyjon Lindsey had a great game. And then Jack Velling, hello, welcome to the Pac-12.
Yeah, so going back to JT Shroud, it took him substantially more passing attempts to get to the 206 at 45%. Didn't throw a touchdown, had the 2 picks. So Ben Gulbranson did outplay him at the quarterback position. But then the receivers, you mentioned Jack Velling had 60 yards. Tyjon Lindsey led the team with 4 catches. 8 different receivers caught a pass. So Gulbranson was, sharing the rock, and the receivers were getting open pretty much at will. But then to your point about the defense, Oregon State defends 5 passes. It's one of the best pass defense teams in the country as far as getting into passing lanes, intercepting them, and knocking them down. They add 5 more to their ledger, which will probably keep them in the top 7-ish in the country. And then they haul in 2 interceptions as well. Jaden Grant had one in the end zone. Alex Austin had a pick 6, the first one at Oregon State since Grant had one in 2019 against Washington. The plays, I mean, it's hard to single out like one player or one play as like, oh yeah, this was the standout from the game, because it was all over. It was in every element of the game that Oregon State just dominated.
Well, and like Jack Coletto forced a fumble. At one point, I was actually about to say, oh, he didn't, and he didn't wrap up quick enough, but then he was actually going to punched the ball out and forced a fumble. So huge play from him. Again, we saw tons of the second teamers playing a lot of minutes, which was good to see, to get those guys some reps. But Jack Velling, you and I think talked about this kind of off the air. I don't want to take anything away from Luke Musgrave, but where Jack Velling is in his improvement game to game this season, he's already playing at a higher level than Musgrave did as a freshman.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we didn't really say Luke Musgrave's name much as a true freshman. It took him about 2 years before he really started to get involved offensively. Jack Velling is now 8 games into his career, and he's looking like Oregon State's best receiver right now, at least in this middle section of the season. I'll highlight in the game flow section of this podcast what he does after the catch, and I think that is what separates him from a lot of the tight ends you see in the Pac-12. Another category, and there's 2 more that we have to highlight before we move on, is the turnover piece. So obviously one of the storylines of Oregon State season has been an inability to hold on to the ball. Well, first play from scrimmage, Oregon State fumbles it, coughs it right up, and gives it to Colorado. I don't think we were too concerned about it at the time, just seeing what the defense was doing. But I mean, you talk about Oregon State playing down to its competition. Well, you literally cannot start any worse than giving the ball to the other team on your first play. Yeah,
it was horrible. But they did come back. 4 turnovers. They were +3 on the night. Huge. And like you said, that pick 6 was such a huge momentum boost for the team. We don't see those often. So, but that first handoff, we've talked about that. We've highlighted just that Gulbranson looks a little shaky on handoffs. And then what happens the very first play was a fumble.
Yeah. But again, Oregon State with the +3 in the turnover margin, it didn't come back to bite them. They actually had 6 players involved on takeaways. So you had Jaden Grant and Alex Austin with an interception each. And then Sione Lolahea on the defensive line forced a fumble. Rajon Wright picked it up. And then in the fourth quarter, Jack Coletto forced a fumble and Isaac Hodgins picked it up. So, I mean, you've got 6 guys to pass the turnover chainsaw to, I guess. That thing was busy. They might need to refill the gas tank on that after this game, because they were revving that up all night long. The pick 6, I think, was maybe not the play of the game, but one of the more impressive plays of the season for sure for Oregon State. One last stat category to highlight here is the tackles for loss and sacks. This actually was the one category that I felt like is telling of maybe an even performance. So Oregon State recorded 5 tackles for loss, sacked JT Shrout once. Colorado had the exact same line, 5 tackles for loss, 1 sack of Ben Gulbranson. And I think that is somewhat indicative of the fact that Colorado's defense is nowhere near as bad as some of its stats may suggest. Because, you just talked about having Adam Munstertiger here on Thursday. Mm-hmm. He talked about, the numbers that Colorado posted the first half of the season, allowing 40 points per game. It's very shocking because Colorado, probably talent-wise, has one of the best defensive lines in the Pac-12. They have some great players in that front seven. Josh Chandler-Tomato had, I think, 11 tackles in this game. And so we saw some of that talent make plays. I just don't think it's a complete enough team for them to do anything with it, which is unfortunate for them. But they do have talent there. And so I think, you see some of these numbers, the 5 tackles for loss, some of the pocket pressure, and I don't think there's too much to be concerned about there.
No, I mean, this is still a Power 5 team. Yes, they've struggled, but that front seven was actually pretty solid. So what did crack me up, though, was at one point Adam had tweeted about Rajon Wright, and I had forgot. So I knew Alton Julian was actually heavily leaning toward Colorado at one point in the recruiting process, but Rajon Wright was as well, and both are Beavers. I'm sure they're a little happy they went the route they did.
Brian Lindgren obviously also coached at Colorado, Oregon State's offensive coordinator. So a lot of ties to that program. And I think a lot of guys were probably, I mean, we can say that it maybe it means a little more to them. I doubt it, but there are ties there for sure. We're going to hit the break real quick, and then we'll come back and take you through some of the big plays of this game, go through chronologically, highlight some individual players, talk about the good, the bad, some injuries, and then we'll revisit the keys of the game. But first, we have to remind you that even though we are heading into a bye week at BeaverBlitz, we're still a place to go to for your Oregon State news. We're going to highlight some postseason scenarios. We'll hand out some, we'll hand out some mid-season report card grades. I think Raju Woodward has some stuff in the works as well. Angie will be busy. And we'll have some recruiting stuff, I'm sure, from the national guys as well. So even though the team might be off this week, we are not going anywhere. In fact, I think we might record another episode of the podcast at some point before the week is over. And then we'll gear back up for another game week next week. But make sure to stick with us, because even though the team's not playing a game this week, we are still going to be posting stuff. And I'm sure conversation in the lodge will be rolling as well. All right, so we mentioned the slow start to this game. It was a little sloppy. Colorado went 3 and out. Oregon State fumbled. Colorado fumbled 3 plays later, with that fumble that Rajon Wright picked up, that Lolo Hea forced. So this game was really played around midfield for the first, 4 minutes or so of this game before somebody finally broke free. But I guess, Angie, I know you mentioned before we re-recorded that you weren't in front of the TV for all of that first 4 minutes, and then you settled in. But how much of that did you see? And I guess, were you concerned at that point that Oregon State might be giving Colorado a little bit of hope early on?
Yeah, this game never felt out of like Oregon State was going to have any trouble with it. Yes, that handoff, that first fumble on Oregon State's first possession was not good. But Oregon State had forced a 3 and out to start the game, so defensively you knew you could count on them. So yeah, I just missed a little bit. I've been a little under the weather, so I had ran upstairs for something, and I came back down and missed the fumble. Seriously, I missed like that one little play. But no, I just never felt out of reach. I mean, it never felt like Oregon State was even going to play with them. I mean, it just seemed like, and obviously, the very next Oregon State fumbles, but then Colorado turns around, fumbles it right back. Seems super sloppy, but things settled in. I think when it really started to feel like it settled in for me was toward the end of the first quarter, when Silas Bolden had that 16-yard run where he like Supermaned into the end zone.
Yeah, before that, it was Damian Martinez crossing the goal line. I feel like that was kind of all right, we can take a deep breath now, like things are, calming down. Oregon State actually did put together a nice, I wouldn't call it a long drive, but, they strung some plays together and then scored on a 4-yard touchdown from Martinez, which would turn into somewhat of a theme throughout the night, as he found Pater 3 touchdowns, or found Pater 3 times for 3 touchdowns. Colorado strung together a few plays and then punted, and then Silas Bolden, like you said, had that 16-yard touchdown with a play at the end where if you haven't seen this play, and I'm sure everyone listening has, you got to go watch it, because it was almost like a Superman dive, but in real time I felt like it was more of a belly flop, and I wanted to say it was a belly flop, but I felt that was taking away from the grace with which he flew through the air, because the landing,
but it was still a belly flop.
Landing, he was a little parallel. He was a little parallel to the ground. but there was a little bit of a trajectory.
But
there.
you know what? So Carter, I don't watch a lot of NFL, but Eric's playing fantasy now, so we've been watching more of it. I don't know if you saw the Thursday night game.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this.
That meme. Okay.
Yeah.
I wish Silas would have done a little flip, because that where Andy Dalton's like kind of just disgusted, throws an interception, doesn't even like run to cover, and you just see he like turns and kind of like dismisses, and in the background you see the guy
just flying through the air
and his whole teammate. I mean, I was like, oh man, Silas needed to do a flip on that one. Anyway.
Somebody did reply to my tweet with a video of that, and said what Silas Bolden was doing is somewhat similar.
He should have done a flip, Silas. Come on.
Now, I will say, when that play occurred, I was like, oh, great. That's unsportsmanlike conduct textbook. This is the college game. You can't do anything to celebrate. And, sure enough, 1 second later, a flag flies. I was like, yep, they got him. Unsportsmanlike conduct on, or, a late hit or something on Colorado. And I was like, wait, really? Like, I thought they were going to get Bolden for that.
A little chippy there. I didn't expect it to get as chippy as it did.
Yeah, Oregon State, I believe, actually did get an unsportsmanlike after the pick 6 on Alex Austin, I think. And if it was against him, it was for nothing but for crossing his arms.
They actually called it, I believe, on Jaden Grant. So I don't know what happened. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Let the kids have some fun.
Yeah. No, seriously. Like, it's not really a Pac-12 ref thing. I think that's more of an NCAA rule, but I mean, we've seen the NFL game become so much more fun with all the celebrations. It's like, as long as it's not like actively taunting, you gotta let guys celebrate a little.
Exactly.
So yeah, Oregon State has a 14-0 lead after the first quarter. You're feeling pretty good. Colorado puts together one of its stronger drives of the game, I guess. They didn't really do much with the ball, but did put together a few plays and string some things together. They get their first points of the game on the first drive of the second quarter on a 44-yard field goal from Cole Becker. So, 14-3, I don't think anybody was really sweating it. But, it takes the stress of, you're playing with a 0 on the board off the table. You weren't worrying about shutout at that point.
Yeah. And that's just hard to do. I know we talked about it maybe a little bit on Thursday, but it's just hard to do, especially if you are in a big position of have a lead. Start playing some of the backups, they're going to score at some point. So nope, took that pressure right off. Oregon State then took the ball, went 5 and out. Were you surprised the Beavs had a punt?
So we should have. This actually should have been like a show prop bet that we should have done on Thursday, was how many punts Oregon State would have. He didn't come in on this one, but I do want to mention that Josh Green actually made his first. Well, I guess he punted it in junior college, but his first Division I punt in this game. We're not afraid to highlight punters at BeaverBlitz and on the damn podcast. So a shout out to Josh Green for getting some action. He actually made his debut earlier on in the season, but he and Luke Loescher both punted one time in this game. So after a couple of punts, Damian Martinez runs for his second touchdown of the first half. This one, a 3-yarder. None of his touchdowns were like, he didn't have, those breakaway plays. Yeah. He did have a couple of breakaway runs later on in the game, but the touchdowns were more just like, all right, like, we're going to reward you for all this hard work you put in on the drive. Which I think is good to see, because, in some situations, those are Jack Coletto plays. Yeah. Jack still got a decent amount of playing time, and he'll end up as one of the top performers of the game in our top performers countdown at BeaverBlitz. But to see Damian Martinez allowed to cap off some of those drives with the shorter touchdowns, you want to reward your running backs, because they didn't come here to play second fiddle to a linebacker,
Yeah. And I think as the defense started to wear down, as Oregon State was having success running the ball, you noticed Martinez and Jam's runs got longer and longer. So, he really didn't, I don't think, have any of those long runs until later on in the game.
At 21-3, it felt like it was, I don't think anybody thought Colorado was going to be able to come back and score 18. No. So it felt like that was the game right there. To the Buffaloes' credit, they did march down the field right after, and it looked like they were going to respond, but I mean, just inexplicably dropped a pass on a wide open pass on what would have been a fourth down conversion, and they turned it over on downs. And that was pretty much the first half. Oregon State took a 21-3 lead into the locker room. Pretty much exactly how we expected it, right? I mean, I picked 34 to 10 as the final. I was like, man, this thing's kind of pacing in my direction. I was kind of quietly rooting for my own prediction. But then Angie, talk about the start to the third quarter, because this is where the game went from like, oh, Oregon State's going to win this to, oh, Oregon State's going to win
and
this.
It did it. When this play happened, it had then. I mean, it was like back to back. It was a span of, I think it was 11 seconds.
11
Oregon
seconds.
State scored 2 touchdowns. The first being Oregon State comes out from half, takes the ball. They get the ball to start the half. Jack Velling, it was a 60-yard TD, but what was so incredible about it was he had 41 yards after the catch, and it was a 1st and 20 to start with. It was a deep throw, and he was able to shed a tackle and beat everybody to the house. So huge play. Like you said, something you typically don't see tight ends being able to shed tackles and continue to run after catch. Most of the time they get tackled, but it was spectacular.
19 yards on the throw from Ben Gulbranson, and then the play goes down as a 60-yarder because Jack Velling, like you said, takes it 41 after the catch. The speed that Velling has shown, and actually, he didn't necessarily display it on this play, but one of the catches he made against Washington State, he had, some of that lateral quickness and the ability to weave through defenders. What he has displayed after the catch through, over these last couple of games is exactly why I think he is like not even a good or great tight end, but a potentially elite tight end in the making, is that he really just looks like a 6'5" wide receiver.
Yeah. And then you leave Jake Overman, and he had 2 pass completions of his own for receptions, but he's such a good blocker. Different body type. He's not as tall, not as fast, but I love that makeup of those two.
And Overman actually had 2 catches in this game. So
he had 2 catches.
The 2 tight ends combined for 3. And we're talking about Velling because he obviously had the big play, but Jake Overman was one of the leading receivers.
I like the makeup of those 2 guys. They're young. They give Oregon State a real kind of 1-2 punch. Kind of, back with the Teagan was more of the blocking, but developed into more of a receiving. But then Oregon State has the touchdown, makes it 28-3.
It's 28-3 at that point. Yep.
And then Colorado comes on the field, and boom, Strout throws a pick 6. Alex Austin takes it back 40 yards for the touchdown.
The very next play from scrimmage. Yeah. So it literally was, I mean, you take out the extra point. It was 2 plays and 2 touchdowns for the Beavers, which, I mean, Colorado hasn't even really taken the field at this point, and they've already given up 14 points in the second half. That felt like,
that was the dagger right there. Yeah.
Like you knew that Colorado wasn't even really going to make this a game from that point forward.
No.
And sure enough, their next drive, they go -2 yards, go 3 and out. Really, I mean, the third quarter, in the middle of the third quarter, there was nothing really notable until Colorado did actually score a touchdown. If you look at the 9 points on the scoreboard, you might think it was 3 field goals, but no. Jale Stacks had a 1-yard touchdown for the Buffaloes. They went 80 yards on that drive. So again, like I said earlier, they did string a few plays together throughout this game, but just the points weren't there. They went for 2 and didn't get it. But let's talk about Jale Stacks because and I actually, you know what? Let's save this for later because I actually do have it. I do have it in the rundown later. But Jale Stacks had a relatively good game for somebody who wasn't getting the volume that you might get in a closer game. So what we're at, that's 35. Quarter. That's 35-9 right there. Go to the fourth quarter, and I mean, at this point, I'll say this: Reser Stadium, the atmosphere at Reser, I will never discount it whatsoever, and home field advantage is very real at Reser. But I walked into the stadium, and it didn't have that big game atmosphere that I had felt the last few weeks. USC, Washington State, those felt like, oh wow, like this place is going to get real loud.
Yeah,
Reser was like, I mean, maybe at like 30% capacity by the time we went to the fourth quarter of this thing.
Oh, yeah,
it was cold. It had rained a little bit, and Oregon State's up by 30 points. So, why watch the fourth? But for those who stayed, they did get to see one more touchdown as Damian Martinez found the end zone for the third time, and on that touchdown got up to 178 yards on 22 carries. We can't talk enough about just how good this guy is. And Angie, did you catch Jonathan Smith's quote in the post game about him?
Oh, I listened to it. I just didn't write it down.
2 words. He's special.
I think I said the same thing.
Yeah.
I think I said he's going to be special, but that was in fall camp.
He's making us look real smart.
Right? He is. I should go take him out for ice cream.
Get him an NIL deal. Before that, Colorado fumbled for their 4th turnover, and Oregon State capitalized with that touchdown. Yeah. But how about the cherry on top in this game? Jaden Grant, if they leave the starters, Oregon State leaves most of its defensive starters in for that final defensive possession. They made a couple of substitutions. Easton Mascarenas-Arnold was in there. I think Jack Coletto got some run on that drive.
Yeah.
And Skylar Thomas actually checked in at safety. Normally we think of him as a corner, but Jaden Grant stays in and intercepts JT Shrout in the end zone. So, I think it's impressive that Oregon State has a big lead in this game, but doesn't let up.
Yeah. And that one interception in our Giant Killers defensive points is what put Jaden Grant. He beat Alex Austin by a half a point to take the Giant Killer title. So that one little just staying in, but they did sub quite a few guys in. Cody Anderson was in. I saw a lot of guys that typically don't see as many minutes, but that was huge. Jaden Grant kind of stealing like you said, it just showed they weren't playing down to competition. They weren't giving up. They weren't sleepwalking through it. It was whistle to whistle.
We'll close the game flow section of this episode with this note that Tristan Gebbia came in for the final drive. Oregon State gets a first down, and then they go into victory formation. Angie, be honest with me. Did you watch that last drive? And did you? Okay, so just I guess generally curious what your thoughts are on Tristan Gebbia getting in, because fans had obviously been kind of clamoring to see him because the play of the other quarterbacks hasn't been great. But I think I just think it's notable to say that Tristan Gebbia is on the football field after the injury he suffered and how long his recovery has been. I mean, you have to feel good for him, right?
Yeah, I think
guy who
that
hasn't been out there for 2 years.
Yeah, and I know the fans, they don't know the whole story of, that was a major injury, surgery, rehab, and now you're dealing with, and I don't know exactly, but I imagine that there's some tightness. He did look like it was a little tight, his hamstrings a little tight. He looked maybe a little limpy. I mean, he obviously is not the same mobile guy that he was pre-injury. It's a major thing. It takes me back to James Rogers. James's was probably maybe a little bit, maybe more severe. I don't know if that's the right thing to say, but James had kind of tore everything in his knee, and to see him come back, he maybe didn't have the quickness that he had once, but it's just a feel good to see him back on the field, because he has. I mean, here's a guy who could have hung up his cleats and grabbed the clipboard a year or two ago, and he still stays on the team. He's still out practicing.
And
as a captain, exactly. So he's helping the younger guys. He's consistently there. Like I said, when he could have been, probably Jonathan Smith would have taken him in a heartbeat as a grad assistant to come help coach. He's still a captain, and he's still leading this team, even if he doesn't maybe have 100% of his, skills back.
Look, I mean, there's a reason that he's the 3rd string quarterback on this team. Like, he's just not the same player and the same quarterback that he was before the injury, which is so unfortunate, because I mean, I know that Oregon State fans are still very, some of them still haven't moved on from the play. And, I think there's been some dialogue between Verone McKinley III and Tristan Gebbia about that not being a maliciously intended play, and it was not intentional and whatnot. You can be the judge of that, but from everything that I've seen between the two on social media, it seems like they're on good terms. But it was a career-altering play.
Yeah.
Like this guy was a Power 5 starter, and now he finds himself as the victory formation guy when QB1 goes down. So it was career altering. And I again, you have to be happy to see him out there, because because he has stayed the course, and he has committed to remaining and being a big part of this team.
And I just, I feel good for him to be able to celebrate with this team as part of the team. But dude, Carter, you probably were already on the field when this happened. So on Martinez's third touchdown, he takes it in, and like one of their guys is trying to tackle him and grabs his leg. The referee was right there, didn't flag it. It kind of pissed me off, kind of fired me up a little bit. Not gonna lie.
Those always scare me a little bit.
I know.
Obviously, there is something to be said for tackling, legs. Like, you are taught
when you're already
to hold on to a leg to bring a guy down at some points, but it always you always worry about a knee going the wrong way or an ankle bending just a little too much.
Yeah, Eric F said he saw it too. Yeah. I kind of yelled at the TV a little bit.
But Damien made it out okay. So his stat line will everything you need to know there. All right, let's talk about what went well that we haven't already discussed, and then what maybe stood out as something Oregon State's going to look at over the bye week and say, hey, I think we should probably clean that up before we go and play a good team at Husky Stadium. But, I guess we kind of talked about this already, but Oregon State just took care of business. I mean, there was never a doubt about it. We talked about when the line opened at 23.5. I was a little skeptical. I said, I don't know if Oregon State can score 24 points right now. The offense looks so uninspiring. And of course, it was against a Colorado defense that was trending upward since making the leadership change. We didn't necessarily think Oregon State had it in them to win this by more than a couple of touchdowns. Sure enough, they did. I think they relied a little bit on their defense to do it, but kind of hard to ask for more than 42 points from the offense, right?
Yeah, no, I thought it was, it was, I can't think of anything. When I was going through he or she said tonight or this afternoon, I really couldn't think of anything to nitpick on.
Right. Yeah. 9 points from the Beaver defense is actually the best defensive performance against a Pac-12 team since they held Utah to 7 points in 2012. So this was, again, like I said, we have talked about after each of the last 3 games. Wait, is that the best defensive game we've seen from Oregon State in a decade? Well, this one literally was, at least as far as the score goes. So we can finally say, yep, this is the new standard. The freshmen continue just to shine on offense. And we talked about Martinez and Belling, but Ben Gulbranson, believe it or not, he's been here for like 20 years, but he is still a freshman. It felt like his best game yet, right? Maybe I already asked you this, but I just think the efficiency that he showed and the ability to hold on to the ball, which has been, maybe his biggest flaw to this point throughout the season. It felt like a get right game for him.
A big confidence building game, I think, for him. He still throws a little high, but honestly, I mean, Colorado knew we were going to try to run the ball. Oregon State was going to run the ball, so I thought he did a really solid job. I liked the mixing of plays. I've been pretty, I guess, vocal about play calling too the past few weeks, and I actually thought the game. I mean, it's easy to call a good game, I guess, when you're winning and everything's working. But I liked the flow. I liked the plays. I liked the mix. I thought overall it was just a solid game.
So speaking of coaching, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't compare this defense and its leadership to that of the 2021 Oregon State team when it played Colorado, because, I mean, this has been a storyline all week that we've been kind of pushing. Is it felt like an opportunity for Trent Bray to show the progress Oregon State has made on his defensive side of the ball since he took the job immediately following the Colorado game last year.
Yes.
Tim Tibesar gave up 37, or his defense gave up 37 points to a Colorado offense that was just about as bad as this one.
Yeah.
And this year, obviously, the 9 points is the best mark against a conference team in a decade. It's a pretty striking dichotomy there between the two defenses.
And really, the personnel is about the same. So 1,000 times better this defense is playing right now.
Here's one for you, Angie. Okay, so for those who aren't aware, the Broyles Award goes to the best assistant coach in college football. My question for you, through 8 games of this season and now 12 games into Trent Bray's reign as defensive coordinator at Oregon State, do you feel like maybe he should be a semifinalist, a finalist for the Broyles Award in 2022 for just what he has done in turning Oregon State's defense around? Because I mean, at least on the back end, this is one of the best defenses in the country.
Yeah. it's funny because this award either goes to like someone that turns things around, or more than likely it will go to somebody that's, Georgia, one of the Georgia assistant coaches or one of the top teams in the country. But looking at numbers where Oregon State was last year to where they are this year, I mean, I think we should start the campaign to get him on the ballot if he's not there, because it's striking. I mean, Oregon State is a top 50 defense now, really across the board. They were one of the worst in the country the past several years. So under Tipisar, it is night and day difference.
Trent Bray would probably appreciate that campaign getting up and rolling, because I'm sure there's some sort of bonus clause in his contract about receiving that award.
Well, so this is something though that got me thinking is like, he's made such a turnaround. He's going to start getting looks from other bigger programs. Oregon State, Scott Bahns, Jonathan Smith need to figure out back that Brinks truck. I mean, so I've said this before about Coach Mihalacek, that you keep him no matter what. And I am now putting Trent Bray in that same. I think if out of any coach on this staff, you keep those two guys and you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think we feel like before we said there were two guys that you had to keep, and it was Jim Holchuk and Brian Lindgren. Now I think that Trent Bray is, I guess if we're comparing coordinators,
way more valuable than
like, right.
Yeah,
exactly. And there's the old saying, defense wins championships. Well, I mean, it's only somewhat true in 2022, but look at what Oregon State has done with a much better defense.
Well, and look at Georgia.
It's incredibly valuable.
Yeah. I mean, 1,000%.
Yeah. All right. Just a couple of things that Oregon State needs to clean up over the bye week. The 10 penalties for 77 yards. We kind of felt like maybe Oregon State had cleaned that up. The penalty piece was a big factor in that Stanford game, and one of the reasons that the Beavers needed a miracle play to win that. They bounced back last week with, I think, 2 against Washington State, maybe 3, but I think it was 2. And then they pile up again in this one. And Jonathan Smith said after the game, some of that just comes with playing aggressively defense, and you're going to get some of those that go against you. But there were a couple procedural penalties. There were a couple of, the unsportsmanlike. Like, it wasn't the cleanest game. Yeah. I know Oregon State won by 33, but it wasn't the cleanest 42-9 win I've ever seen.
What I will say is Colorado was just as chippy. So at some level, Oregon State's going to, I do have to laugh. Carter, you were there, so you didn't see it up close, but there's a couple plays that I love Rajon, but Ray likes to talk, and he was in those receivers' ear a few times.
Okay, so here's one for you, because maybe I didn't see it on the replay, but there's no way that the TV showed this one. So after, I can't remember what play it was. Oh, actually I do. It was the one where I believe it was Kyrie Fisher-Morris that intercepted a pass that was called back for defensive holding. I think it was Kyrie who was on the intercepting end of that, but the holding penalty was on this side of the field, closest to the press box, and the interception was going the other way. And Rajon was over, kind of closer to me down in front of the press box where the flag was thrown, and all this action's occurring on the other side. Well, Rajon's over here and he picks up the flag and he kind of hides it, and he's like, "What? I didn't do anything. Like, there's no flag on the field." And then the ref kindly asked for it back and kind of gave him a little bit of a scolding. I think it was all
fun,
good natured and whatnot. But after that, I said, Rajon Wright really does have one of the best personalities.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. It was actually, so it was Colorado when the receiver missed that ball, like, it was right to him from the 4th down conversion that he dropped, and Ray was like right there, like, and just walk by and kind of, you could just see him chirping a little bit, and I was like, yeah, I gotta wonder what he's saying.
Classic Rajon Wright.
It was awesome. It was actually he's the type of guy you are glad is on your team.
Yeah,
but I love the swagger.
Yeah, the one thing earlier on in the episode that I said we should hold on to towards the end is Jale Stacks for Colorado. Their tailback. They call him tailbacks at Colorado still.
He's
They're not
huge.
Had a sneaky good game. He only touched the ball 8 times because that's
When
game script stuff.
Yeah.
You're going to be passing the ball a lot. His 8 carries, he averaged 6.3 yards per carry, which is like, he would fit right in the Oregon State backfield in a game like this where the Beavers run for almost 300 with that number. If the game script allows him to touch the ball more than 8 times, maybe we're talking about Jale Stacks having a bit of a breakout game.
Yeah, no, he was impressive. Big kid. So, but didn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, for all that we talk about Oregon State's run defense having just an absurd stretch of 3 games. I do think it's worth noting that on a per carry basis, they couldn't necessarily slow this guy down.
Yeah, he was impressive.
Speaking of running backs, I think Oregon State's Deshaun Fenwick is really the only injury note that we have from this game. James Rawls on the defensive line did go down after a play, but he's fine. Deshaun Fenwick suited up, was on the sideline, but did not play, as Isaiah Newell kind of stepped into the running back rotation in his absence towards the end of this thing. But it was mostly just a Damian Martinez. It's going to get most of the looks. Jam Griffin comes in as kind of the change of pace guy. But Deshaun Fenwick was actually available as the emergency back, Jonathan Smith said afterwards. He just wasn't feeling 100% before the game. And, I don't know if that was injury or if he was sick or something, but it doesn't sound like this is like a major thing for Fenwick.
Well, now there's 2 weeks. I mean, they have time. So, hopefully they get some of these guys back. Still concerned about Chance Nolan. Did not see him on the sideline again. Did you see him on the field?
Did not see him. Will admit wasn't like actively looking, insanely hard for him. But no, I do think, if we come out of the bye week here and he's going on 5 weeks in concussion protocol, we're going to have some serious questions to ask.
Yeah.
But no, it's not like entirely unheard of for a guy to be in concussion protocol for 3 weeks. So I'm still not like terribly concerned about it. But like we were saying on Thursday, I do think the injury was a little bit more serious than anyone was letting on to begin with.
Okay, so we talk about our keys to the game because we kind of nailed it, Carter. We kind of nailed it.
Yeah, I'm seeing 4 different keys to the game, 1 offense, 1 defense for each of us. And I've got
a lot of yeses.
4 yeses. So I guess.
And you wrote down my keys, so we're not guessing.
So we actually can start with you this week. Take your victory lap on calling for Oregon State to run the ball.
Run the ball. 44 carries, 270 yards, 3 touchdowns. Booyah.
It's about as good as it gets, really.
Yes, it is.
And some of the numbers that maybe we expected from Oregon State's running game entering the year took them a while to do it, but they are trending. So far upward right now. The last 3 or 4 weeks that run game has just really started to take off. And interestingly enough, that really coincides with Damian Martinez becoming more and more of a weapon in this offense. So not to say we told you so, but
your offensive key to the game is actually pretty spot on too.
Yeah, I said Oregon State,
and not just once.
I said Oregon State had to score early and often, build an early lead, don't give Colorado any confidence. Well, the defense forces a 3 and out and then takes the ball away from Colorado. So it did that part. But offensively, to score 14 points before Colorado's even on the board, to score 35 before the Buffs even find the end zone, it was never close. The offense pretty much put it out of reach. Like I said earlier, I mean, midway through the second quarter, I felt like we were at a point where Colorado was never going to be able to keep up. So shout out to the offense for bouncing back from just a terrible first play and scoring a bunch of points early. Defensively.
I said that they needed to pad the interception numbers and pressure the QB. And so I had 2, and they were both yeses. Gosh, I totally forgot, too, that Kyrie Fisher. So, I mean, Oregon State actually kind of had, well, you can't count it, but they had a 3rd interception in there that got called back because of a penalty on a different side. So 2 interceptions, 1 sack, 6 QB hurries.
Pretty well-rounded there.
Yeah, very well-rounded group.
So I'm going to throw this message from the chat up on the screen if you're watching us live on YouTube. Angie obviously has coined the term Sack City to describe the Oregon State defense. Roger suggests Sack Vallis. How do we feel about it?
That's not bad. That's not bad, but I still would love to see Corvallis and Oregon State embrace the Cor Vegas moniker, just like Stark or is it Stark Vegas?
Yeah, Stark Vegas down at Mississippi State.
Yeah.
Just embrace it.
Sack Vallis. But yeah, we didn't quite see Sack City, but
no, but we saw quarterback hurry City.
We did. And that's close. I still like I said, Cor Vegas. I know it's old, but it's so good.
Angie called for Oregon State to pad the interception numbers. I just said Oregon State needed to take the ball away. I'd say 4 takeaways is getting the job done there.
It's pretty good.
2 fumbles and 2 interceptions too. So they were doing it in a variety of ways.
Yes, well-rounded.
Is impressive too there. Jack Coletto, shout out to him for that forced fumble where he kind of punched the ball out. That's textbook stuff right there.
Like I said, I was actually kind of watching it thinking, oh my gosh, he needs to get that guy down. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh wait, no, he was trying to punch the ball out. Yeah.
That's true from Tanis in the chat. The track team has coined the phrase throw Valis for, I think the shot put and javelin. You actually, if you drive by the track facility, it does say throw Valis on the fence line. Sack Valis might have, we might be onto something here.
There you go, Sack Valis.
But maybe that's another bye-week
That's another bye-week discussion. The Corvegas Bowl. Yes. In Vegas. Yes. Corvegas
Oregon
in
State
Vegas.
to the Las Vegas Bowl would be a lot of fun. I'm sure we would see a lot of BeaverBlitz members there.
Yes. We might have to do a BeaverBlitz tailgate there.
Yeah. We can ponder all of this and more if we do a bye-week episode of the damn podcast, which I think we will. We're gonna have enough stuff in the tank after going through the first
Score
few days
Valis.
of this.
How about Score Valis?
Score Valis is good too. We'll have enough stuff in the tank and in the back of our minds after we publish some of our bye-week content that maybe we'll come back on Thursday or over the weekend or something and talk a little bye-week stuff before we preview Washington. If we don't talk to you before then, it'll be about a week and a half. We'll be back on Thursday, November 3rd. I believe I'm crunching the numbers there, correct?
Yes,
November 3rd
yes.
To preview Washington. And we'll probably have a 24/7 sports expert on with us to do
because
so.
The Beavs actually, you know what? Total off topic, Carter, and I know it's going to make us run over, but you'll like this. So Erica, my wedding anniversary is November 4th. We got married. The Beavs played at Cal the 2000 year. We actually piped the game in while we did pictures before the wedding. Beavs win on the road down in Berkeley. We go on our honeymoon while the Beavs are gone at Arizona and come back 2 days before Civil War.
Good omens, I would say.
Yes.
Good omens. November 4th. It's a Friday night game in Washington. We'll be back to preview it. Until then, head to BeaverBlitz for all sorts of bye-week content and follow Angie Machado on Twitter at Angie Machado1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns, and we'll talk to you at some point in the next week and a half for another episode of the Damn Podcast.